to this second go-around of the RTA Technical Management Committee's Project Review Task Force. We reviewed, I don't know what, 10 or 12 projects the first go-around, and I think that our efforts were productive, and hopefully we can review 3 or 4 or 5 projects this time and have equally successful results. I would like to mention that the 5 members on this task force include John Bernal and myself as co-chair, Bill Carroll, who's a professional engineer, as well as John and myself, Bob Venarino, also professional engineer, and Frank Thompson, a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. So 3 of us were, yes, John and myself and Frank were members of the first go-round. So we do have some experience. The 3 or 5 of us have some experience in this review of RTA projects. So, I think this is going to be both challenging and fun, and hopefully it's productive as well. Now, as I understand it, Jim, we have 3 projects to review so far. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. We have received 3 requests for scope changes.
Good.
These 3 projects are RTA number 5, Silver Bell Road, which was a request of the county to widen from 4 or basically 2 4 lanes north of El Camino del Cerro up to Ina. That's a project that is scoped in the RTA plan as a 3-lane roadway section. We have a downscoping request on North First Avenue from Orange Grove Road to Ina Road. Actually, it's a project recommended for elimination. That came in the same request from Pima County as the Silver Bell Road project, and in fact, they were coupled, one basically being asked to be a donor to the other. And then we have a rescoping request from the city of Tucson on RTA project number 14, First Avenue, Grant Road to River Road. So just kind of looking at the universe of these projects and what we might see going forward are first, requests for potential project elimination entirely. If the jurisdiction feels that it's not a project that they are no longer committed to, that's a request that we may see, and that I think would be consistent with what we heard on the county's North First Avenue section. We have requests for project elimination, which project reduction, where we would look at a scope reduction due to some changed conditions, which is what I believe the city is identifying as the basis for their request to reduce First Avenue and focus the improvements more on pedestrian and bicycle safety, while maintaining the same vehicular capacity or perhaps enhancing it at intersections. And then we have requests that are or have been made and will be sought after in the future, and those are for scope enhancements or expansions where the jurisdiction would like to go above and beyond what's in the RTA plan scope. And we have a history of doing that in the past, where we have received additional funds from the local jurisdiction to augment and support the cost increase associated with a project expansion, and that's clearly identified as a path forward in our administrative code if additions are requested. However, in this particular case, we're looking at an increasing number of situations where the jurisdictions are going to be looking to the RTA to help fund these scope expansions. So those are kind of the three categories, if you will, of project changes that are being sought. And I took the liberty of drafting a very, very high-level, succinct overview of what things we might look at in each of those 3 conditions, which are attached to the staff report.
Look like that?
Looks like that.
Good.
That,
Okay.
by the way, is posted online, so public has access to this document.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So we have a bit of I think, a time constraint on this. Personally, I'd like to see us kind of wrap up our work by late spring or early summer on this. Since we've kind of been through this before, we have a pretty good idea. And the two jurisdictions that we're going to be dealing with so far, of course, are the city of Tucson and Pima County. And they have gone through this review process before. And I think the principals at those jurisdictions are still around and are familiar as well. So I think that will help simplify things. But one thing I was hoping could happen, Farhad and Jim, would be to send out an extremely strong plea to the jurisdictions if there are any other projects out there they want us to consider, that they do it ASAP, so we can roll that into our work plan. For example, it wouldn't make much sense to go to visit the city of Tucson and review one project and come back in the fall or whatever and review it again. Hopefully they can tell us now. I'm not picking on the city, but each of the jurisdictions can tell us. So if we have to do 6 projects now rather than 3 now and 3 later, personally, I just as soon try to get them all done in one batch.
That's an excellent point. As you recall, during the TMC meeting, we had a conversation along those lines, and there were a couple other suggestions brought up during the meeting. So excellent point. We'll follow up and make sure that if anybody else wants to submit official requests, that they would do that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add that we have heard on 3 specific projects that, and again, some are reducing the scope and some are expanding the scope.
Mhm.
So we have all of those to consider. And there's also an overriding policy discussion that needs to be conducted as well. And that relates to, how do we move these forward? If we're looking at something that departs from what the voters voted on, is that something that the voters need to reconsider? And that's something that I think is an open question.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you.
Hey, Kurt, let me ask a couple questions. Jim, just on one of the 3 that we've identified, Silver Bell Road, it's a Pima County request, but I assume that crosses jurisdictional boundaries, does it not?
Mr. Bernal, yes, it definitely does. It involves, at the very least, Pima County and the town of Marana. I believe it may also, I'd have to take a look at exactly where the project limits are for the El Camino del Cerro to Goree Road phase, whether or not that would also involve City of Tucson right of way as well. But this is something that all 3 years ago had indicated they were interested in seeing this and had informally suggested that they could bring funding to the table. However, that funding that was pre-recession, really. So the availability of that funding is not what it once was.
That's why I'm asking the question, because we're talking about a scope increase, and given in general the guidance that the RTA puts out, that if you're going to expand the scope, there's going to have, and it requires more resources. It's got to come perhaps from the sponsoring jurisdiction. In this case, jurisdictions, maybe plural. Yeah. And that's why I wondered if we've got agreement between those 3, or at least those two. That
I think the city limits comes up about 1,000 feet north of ECDC.
Yeah.
So the city would be touching the southern end of the city of Tucson.
But Marana's got a healthy chunk, I think. Do they not?
Oh yeah, yeah. Marana has, I think, about 40%. Of project length.
So that's one, and the other one, going back to your point, Kurt, about getting all the projects identified. If in fact the county is rethinking their First Avenue piece and not for total elimination, it wouldn't seem worth our while to spend a lot of time talking about elimination this first go around if they're going to just talk about scope modification. And I just throw that out to, see if we can get any clear reading from the county.
Yeah, it seems to me on project elimination, that's clearly in the realm of taking it back to the voters, I would think.
Yeah.
Jim,
was-
any
Yeah, that was discussed at the TMC as well, and I got the same kind of a sentiment from other TMC members that, you know, if there is a desire to modify the scope, then we will have that confirmed from the county. And if it's elimination, that would be something that we would want to definitely make sure that we recommend for a RTA next discussion.
Yeah, good. So I have a kind of I don't know if it's a policy question or a legal question. If the first RTA goes from 06 to 26, and if the voters reinitiate the RTA with RTA next, let's say in 2024, that would be kind of like 2 years of overlap in there. So would it be logical to consider the projects, for example, that might not have enough money under the current first RTA, if they're rolling into that in-between area, are they considered still RTA 1 projects or RTA next projects? To me, they would still be considered the RTA 1 projects.
Yes, so I think a better way of looking at it is you have a 2-year overlap between the first plan and the second plan. The second plan still needs to be approved by the voters, but in the plan itself, it could be identified that the first 2 years of the new plan are continuation of the current plan, and clearly spell out which projects are in that overlap period.
Yeah.
And obviously the funding for those projects would be from the new plan. And it just needs to be clearly spelled out so everybody understands that it's continuation of the current plan and it's just an overlap mechanism.
Yeah, good. I think that overlap mechanism can work to everyone's advantage too, you know, particularly, you know, the issues we've had with funding shortfalls and, you know, the forecast being off and first the 2008 recession, then followed by COVID. So I think that gives us a great opportunity with the 2 years of overlap. So good.
Yeah, I'd add that clearly in the statute, it contemplates the ability for the voters to change the plan through a vote. And they would, in the case of an extension, we would change the plan, potentially what's in the last 2 years of the plan, as well as adding additional projects and duration and funding.
Yeah, good. Okay. So I think that kind of gives us a pretty good our foundation for moving forward. We need to, I think, first of all, get a commitment on what projects are we reviewing. And then basically, I think, talk policy-wise how we're going to review them. And I think you have a good start document there, Jim, in what you attached. And then maybe talk a little bit about schedule. Over lunch today, I put together just primarily for myself, kind of I'm calling it a kind of a conceptual work plan for us to discuss. And I'll just kind of talk about it a little bit today, and maybe we can get something out to the group and to the public and talk about it in some more detail later. But there's a lot of firm overlap with this conceptual work plan and what you set out, Jim. And what I've tried to do with this is kind of identify what the major steps are, and kind of sequentially, and who's primarily responsible for them. So the first step is to identify the projects proposed for consideration and any additional ones that we need to consider. And that's obviously something the RTA staff in the jurisdictions would do. Initiate that final opportunity for the jurisdictions to submit basically a final request or a last request for project revisions or eliminations, whatever they might be. And then between the jurisdictions and the RTA to give us the current project status, the available funding, the funding shortfall, the status of the planning, design, right-of-way acquisition, and permitting. And permitting is an issue, Jim, because you mentioned at one point that Silver Bell has got a clock ticking on the environmental permitting. So when we get talking about that project, that will be important. And then I think it would be good for all of us to have a field review of the existing conditions on these projects. And we can do that independently. We can even, Google Earth Street View is current enough. Matter of fact, during the TMC meeting, when we were talking about the county's First Avenue project, I just clicked on Google Earth Street View just to refresh in my mind what that section of First Avenue looked like. So Then we review the 2006, the original project, the scope, the cross-section, the funding, the schedules, and so on. In other words, what did we promise to the voters? And then the next step is to hear specifically what these changes are, including the functionality changes with the proposals. And then one of the things I think we need to do is identify the benefits of the proposed changes, because obviously I don't think anybody's proposing changes without foreseeing some benefits in doing that. Then we need to identify what disadvantages might be associated with his proposed changes, whether it's a capacity constraint or if it's a safety or drainage improvements not being made, whatever. Discuss any opportunities that are lost and gained. For example, if we reconstruct a roadway now at a reduced cross section and don't acquire the additional right-of-way that might be necessary for, say, a needed widening in 10 years, are we putting ourselves into a box by doing that? So once we assemble, the task force have all that information assembled, we can start to draft recommendations for talking amongst ourselves, then a preliminary draft for RTA and the TMC to look at, and then basically to finalize after that. And I recognize that our work is purely recommendations as well. We're kind of like a planning and zoning commission on this. We're just recommending to the TMC a course of action and to try to justify why we're recommending a certain course of action. And then it's up to the technical management committee. So the review products would be a relatively brief summary of the current status and so on, what we find out about all the projects, including the scopes and so on. And then our recommendations and rationale associated with each project. Prepare a presentation for the technical management committee, and we can work on that with staff, and you all can do the presentations. Last time, Paul Sella, with the help of the task force, made the recommendations, and then I think at some point there was a presentation to the regional council as well. So that's kind of the status of it all. But ideally, I'd like to see us done with our work within the next 4 months or so, which puts us in roughly in the June timeframe. And if we meet every 2 weeks and can get the jurisdictions lined up and work efficiently, I think we can do that. Jim and Farhad. The last time, Paul and I did a lot of the administrative work. I think Paul's wife did a lot of the typing on the reports. I did some of the graphics.
I did most of the typing.
Yeah. Oh, John did. Oh, okay. John did the typing. I did some of the graphics. So it was combined work effort. And I think hopefully this time we can rely more on your staff, Farhad and Jim, to do that. If they can read our sloppy handwriting and sloppy notes, to do that. So
yeah, we're here to assist you anyway. I know Paul enjoyed typing it out himself, but I didn't know John. I didn't know John did the typing for him.
He did a lot of editing. Paul did.
I was going to say he didn't let me do any editing.
Hey, Kurt, I have a couple of thoughts on your work plan. Just to be clear, I think the second step about initiating final opportunities for the jurisdictions is probably going to come from the TMC.
Yeah, all right.
I mean, they put it out the first time. I assume they'll put it out again. And of course, we've got to go back to them anyway, I think, with criteria, which I think is on the agenda today. So I think a third bullet in there before we start getting into the specifics of the project is criteria, report back to the TMC, and a timeline, that you've just mentioned.
Right.
Does that make sense?
John,
Yes.
if I may, I think since we've already made the request, I think it would be maybe more timely for us to make the request on behalf of the task force at this point. And we've had the conversation and you're all really tasked to continue this effort. So if you don't mind, we'll put it out shortly after this conversation and make that last request for any additional projects.
Well, Farhad, I didn't think I was going to get into this, but because of the action of the TMC board last week, where they want to add a member to the TMC from the city,
Yes, so that's obviously a separate conversation. We'll go through that process for adding a TMC member from City of Tucson to the TMC, but that does not impact your task force at all.
No, I just thought if we are sensitive about that, would it be best for the TMC, including the new rep, to make this appeal to everybody? I don't know. It's up to you guys, whatever you
We'll
think.
be happy to. It's up to you all if you want to wait until having a TMC action for that request. That's up to you.
I'm okay with the task force putting it out. I just, like I said, just didn't know how that was going to ripple with the little change that was just made.
Yeah, I would add that I think the city, whoever the city representative is that's ultimately selected, my sense is they're already attending and watching these meetings. And until such time as they appoint a new DTM director, I think the folks that have been engaged thus far will remain engaged. And so I don't see much change there.
But again, back to the timeline, then it does make sense, I assume, because I think that's what you all have in mind with the discussion today about criteria, is to take that back to the TMC at the earliest possible opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I may, I think it's helpful to keep the line of communication open between the task force and TMC. I would hope that we can do that through memos and not wait for another meeting. But again, it's up to you. If you want any official action from the TMC, then obviously we would have to wait until the next scheduled meeting.
Yeah, it would seem the TMC would have to have, I guess, a final authorization on the projects that we review. Otherwise, it would seem like we are approving the projects that we're going to review. So it would probably, our staff, just so long as we can keep things moving along. I think whatever works. I mean, even establishing the criteria, we could probably schedule to meet with the City of Tucson sometime in the next 3 weeks or so to review the First Avenue project while we're still working on resolving the criteria, which maybe we can have that set by essentially by our next meeting in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
On it. So I think it's almost to the point where we can start to set up a meeting with certainly with the City of Tucson and Pima County, and on Silver Bell, to me that's kind of a second priority. My biggest concern, John, about Silver Bell is that we're going to have, and Jim as well, that we're going to have I-10 ripped up essentially at the same time as Silver Bell if we try to move ahead and take advantage of the current environmental permitting. But to me, having two parallel corridors ripped up essentially within a quarter mile of each other just might not be too acceptable to the public, because Silver Bell is the reliever corridor for I-10. So,
sure.
Yeah. Frank, you got any thoughts? It looks like you're thinking there.
Yep.
Frank, I think you muted yourself.
Yep.
Oh, there he is.
Got it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean to put you on the spot, Frank.
And it's, we have a couple of other things that are affecting this. Number one, the city's action, where they're going to have a separate go at the voters for the mostly improvements to local streets, et cetera, that they just passed. And then clearly understanding the schedule of when RTA is going to go back with Next and the rest of it. And I think being pretty clear with everyone on how that schedule is going, how all these other things are going to fit in, much less our review of these projects, is kind of important to memorialize and each be working with the same playbook.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of pieces to the jigsaw puzzle right now. Because our role, as I see it, is to look primarily at the the technical and the traffic issues, make sure that the voter commitment is fulfilled to the extent practicable. Then to look at the financing, and then to look at the policy implications and the likelihood the voters coming out in support as well. But my understanding is that the city already is, they're looking for an extension of their current half-cent, and that it's primarily for road maintenance. I'm in unincorporated county, so I'm not tuned into that too much. But Jim and Fire, I think Frank is right about that. Is that the case?
Well, if I may, the regional council action last week actually helps with this conversation as well. As part of that discussion, regional council agreed that we would develop a plan on how RTA, current RTA projects will be included in RTA Next. So that's a conversation we've been having so far. That was one of the parameters of the conversation, that we'll come back with a plan, define which projects, identify the funding needed for those projects. So that's really consistent with what we've been talking about so far for you all to start looking at. And I think timing is really helpful, because ideally, if you can identify a number of projects, potentially 3 or 4 projects with the funding to help us close that funding needs analysis that we did and we shared with the TMC at the last meeting. If we can come up with roughly the $120 million range that we discussed, those are ideal candidates for moving from the current RTA to RTA Next. Yeah. And then the next question was the timing. What is appropriate timing? And that's a conversation that we're going to have with the board, and obviously we'll share their thoughts with you as well. But currently, there is a desire for that overlap. And the overlap of at least 1 year would be reasonable. 2 years is feasible. I think anything more than 2 years at this point is probably not feasible. So we're looking at a minimum a 2-year overlap.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Sounds good. So as far as criteria, John, obviously I think what the big nut is whether or not a change in scope is significant enough to trigger a vote on this, in which case would automatically defer something into the RTA Next. And so it gets back into this issue of functionality. And to me, one of the most important criteria is, if we're changing a project, what functionalities are we changing? For example, if we were to go along with total elimination of First Avenue from Orange Grove to Ina, then absolutely none of the functionalities of the proposed projects will accrue. So, I would encourage the county to go back and kind of revisit that. On the southern section of First Avenue, I could come up with a laundry list of 30 or 40 probably benefits or functionalities that come out of the project. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, the city's proposed change to that project significant enough that it will require voter action, or is it something that we can recommend to the technical management committee that the changes be implemented now, and they go ahead with an altered scope on it? So, Jim, between the list of functionalities that you have, plus I think most of the TMC members saw the presentation at First Avenue, and I think there was a list of functionalities in that PowerPoint. We probably have a good list of starting things to look at on the projects. So,
hey, Kurt, before we get too far into First Avenue, how about if we let Jim or Rick take us through the criteria they drafted?
Yeah,
I think you're right. It's a good start. I think it may be what we want to adopt as our criteria.
Sure.
Okay, well, I will tell you that Rick contributed a fair number of these pieces to me. I'll go ahead and kind of go through it as I drafted it and reframed the information that Rick provided. And I know others of you have also certainly looked at or have sent me thoughts, and we may wish to add to those as well. But anyway, I tried to keep it at a fairly high level with these and fairly succinct. Again, I broke it out by the 3 different types of requests that we're getting. The first was project elimination, and one of the things that I had identified 4 key things to consider. And then there's also the consideration of whether it should be taken back to the voters for their addressing it as well. But in terms of the technical merits, the first was to look at the condition of the existing infrastructure that's being retained. Are the key features adequate, deficient, or would they be replaced or upgraded if the original project scope were constructed? And then we should specifically look at pavement conditions, roadway drainage infrastructure. I know that's routinely upgraded when we do a project, whether it's even if we were to keep the same roadway prism, we would typically upgrade the drainage structures to bring them up to current standards. Look at multimodal improvements, which many of our projects, that's a big addition to the functionality of the corridors, because in many cases we don't have or we have inconsistent improvements for multimodal users. And then look at structures. Certainly, if there's a key structure out there, whether it's a retaining wall or a bridge, those are probably some of the more expensive structures that we would be looking at. Are they structurally sufficient, and will they have a lifespan that is adequate for our future or for our retention of it? Second was to look at what we think the changed conditions might be that would warrant consideration of a change. What are the current traffic volumes? What are our future volumes? We know that when we went to the went to the voters back in 2006, we were doing that with a 2030 plan that forecast a very different future than the one we're currently expecting. I think I was looking at just some basic demographics, and we were looking at in the 2030 plan, we have, I think we were looking at over 1.5 million population. Right now, our most recent RMAP for 2045 is more like 1.2 million people. So we've depopulated our estimated future community. Look at volume to capacity ratios on our existing infrastructure. Are they adequate? Are we already over capacity? And we also have to consider that there's going to be, or there have been, mode shifts. There will likely continue to be mode shifts. Right now, we're in the midst of a huge mode shift that I don't think any of us know where it's going to end up at, as we all are on this particular meeting conversing by Zoom. And the workplaces, professional workplaces in particular, have changed dramatically. And then we got safety considerations. All modes need to be considered that would be served by a future project, and we need to make sure that we're not leaving any modes behind in terms of safety improvements. And clearly, one of the big benefits of project improvements is changes in access management, and that helps with pedestrian safety, vehicular safety, bicycle safety. All of our modes are benefited by having better access management. And I think the final consideration on project elimination is, is a scope reduction preferable to a project elimination, and that might be something that you would wish to consider recommending. Second classification or second group of requests would be scope reduction and revision. And I think a lot of the same characteristics need to be looked at. I think if we're reducing the scope, we're presuming that we're still going to be doing the infrastructure upgrades and rebuilds. So maybe not looking so much at cross drainage structures. They'd be addressed either way, but it's really more about addressing the demands for each of the modes, and how. I think it also is important to consider the impact that the corridor that we are looking at has on adjacent corridors, and whether or not if we choose not to widen one corridor, will that put a greater demand on a parallel corridor that may be nearby? And then, if there are any optional upgrades that we're looking at, is there local funding for those? And that really leads us to scope expansion and the third classification that we were looking at. And those would be, again, demand driven, what's happening in the area, are we looking at some changed conditions, more growth than we had anticipated previously, more, are the land uses changing, are the modes and are people traveling the corridor differently than they were previously? Are these things that we should be looking at? And what will the overall scope change have on the functionality of the corridor? Will we be, are we bringing in additional safety considerations? What does it do for growth expectations? Are we throttling something in the future that we may wish to be able to do, or are we enhancing it? Those are questions that I think both go to the contraction and expansion conversations. And then, when we're looking at expansion, are there other sources of revenue that we should be considering trying to bring to bear on that, whether they're local? Clearly, if a big development plan is being looked at, should we be looking at addressing it through development impact fees or other tools that may be available to bring resources from new development to bear, CFDs, whatever, and then are there grant funding opportunities? We have now a new infrastructure bill that's out there. We don't fully understand what the potential is of all of the components of that particular bill, but we're going to be looking at that and looking at it with an eye towards how we might be able to bring some of these resources to bear on the projects that we might want to expand. In terms of tools we can provide to you, I've already got our team looking at providing to me the traffic forecasts and existing traffic volumes. Those I have now for all three projects, and by pieces of the larger First Avenue one, I've got it in segments, so we can look at what we thought it would be when we were looking at the 2030 plan, what we think it's going to be in the 2045 plan, and what it is when we counted it last. So we'll be able to provide that to you. We certainly need to make sure you all have access to the administrative code and the RTA statutes. We have the original cost estimates, and with the cost estimates that were done for us back in 2005, we also had line drawings that were prepared by URS that were the basis for that estimate. So you can see what was being envisioned at the time that the scope was developed. And then we certainly have the current cost estimates that were developed with the RMAP and some of the more recent estimates that we've gotten from our jurisdictional partners.
Jim, that's a lot of good resources for us, and I think all of them are in a digital format. So would it be possible to set up like a Dropbox or something, so that rather than emailing everything out, we're all putting everything in our own files, that we can just go online and have one location where all these resources are available to us? I think it might make our lives a little bit easier. At least I don't know what it does to you.
Yeah, I think we can certainly make that material available, and we'll also make it visible to the public, so the public has access to this information as well. Good,
good. If we notice anything in these documents that might be considered a Scrivener's error, how should we let you know about that? I'll give you an example. The original documentation for the northern end of Silver Bell talks about turn lanes at two intersections. One is at Sunset and the other is at Orange Grove. And as you know, there is no intersection of Orange Grove and Silver Bell.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can certainly hammer through those things.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and let us know about them. We've seen some Scrivener's errors in the past. I think we've worked around them and have an understanding of what's really intended, and we can clarify that if that's helpful.
Yeah.
And yeah, there clearly were some assumptions that were made in some of our projects, particularly in the cost estimating. I don't think there was any realization of some of the or the extent of the archaeology on say Silver Bell.
Right.
And there are a few projects that as we were developing the original plan, we may have overlooked some things that were big drivers of cost. We're more aware of them now,
Right.
and we'll certainly identify them to the committee.
Sure. The good thing is that over the last 14 years, roughly 16 years, there's been a definition and clarification of things in the original plan that weren't particularly clear. For example, what was the cross section for a desert parkway? So that's been resolved through project design. We now know what a desert parkway looks like. So I think our task in these project reviews will be a little bit easier since we're 16 years into a 20-year plan. So that's good. So,
yeah, there were a lot of terms of art in the documents, and certainly one of the ones we've always struggled with is just the term functionality, and what does that mean? I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and at the end of the day, it probably means them all. So
good. Well, that said, Jim, you've got a lot of good information here, and so we could just discuss it. Is Bill Carroll on? Is he here?
No, Bill is not. Bill is traveling. And so he was unable to join us. It also appears that Bob Anarino may have dropped off. I don't see his little icon on the board here, but we'll certainly.
I still see him on the phone line.
There he is.
Good. Okay. Well, we have a quorum regardless. So anyhow, what I hope we can do in the next couple of minutes is maybe talk over your draft criteria. Jim, just a little bit, and then adopt these and move forward. And I had one additional clarification on you're talking 1B about roadway drainage infrastructure. I would also add a floodplain into drainage, because there's a lot of areas, particularly in the city, where there are flooding issues that are mitigated, and it's beyond roadway drainage as well. And then when we talk about the First Avenue Bridge, that's a potential floodplain issue there rather than a road drainage. So if we just add floodplain in there someplace, I think we're good.
Kurt, similarly, when I looked at the scope reduction criteria, I think we need to add safety considerations into that. We have it under scope expansion, but we certainly wouldn't want to reduce the scope on a given project without considering what we can do to address safety concerns. So I would repeat that.
Yeah, good.
I wonder if Bob's got any thoughts about any of this stuff, since he's still on the line.
Bob is a smart guy. I'm sure he's got something to say.
He's muted.
Good.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. A lot of good discussion. So I apologize for hit and miss on where I'm at. But thanks for allowing me to put just a couple additional thoughts that I had. Maybe they're secondary, but this group, I guess we'll be working with let's call it the lead agency jurisdiction. And do we have some autonomy in providing recommendations that will require some of their support before we present a formal presentation to TMC? And should that be in there to have some maybe interim discussions after we've made some hard recommendations to see whether or not they're in support?
Yeah, I like that idea, Bob. That's almost like an inspector general review process. They'll get
I don't want to.
Yeah.
We don't want to bog down the iterations, but I think we could be making some decisions that they may not agree with.
Yeah, exactly.
The lead agency.
Right. I think that's a great idea. You know, what the inspector generals do at the federal level anyhow, they'll draft a report about some functioning of an agency, usually at the request of a congressman, in this case, the TMC. They'll go out, work with the staff, they'll draft the recommendations, send it back to the agency, get their comments, review their comments and revise them if appropriate. And then the comments that aren't addressed, they will put them as like counterpoints in their report. So it'll probably be good for us to do something like that too. That way we can go forward with the jurisdictions at least knowing and having had an opportunity to review what our position is, as a task force. So I think that's great. I'm glad you were listening, Bob. That was a good idea.
Well, and I have just one small other one that this is more of a personal issue that goes back to my days on the private sector side. And it's really at the, whether we do scope reduction or scope expansion, and in particular, the First Avenue corridor. I've always felt that was a perception issue, a challenge when we as a community would bring in a Fortune 500 company and, you know, they fly into the airport and we've dressed up some of the airport perception. Then we take them downtown and then they say, well, okay, give us, you know, how do we get up into, say, the foothills and start looking at housing or other parts of the community? And First Avenue was always kind of that one corridor that was rough on the eyes, you know, and not to say that it's primary to the functionality of First Avenue, but I don't want to just discard it.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is aesthetics. And that's, you know, I sent Jim a list of criteria. I'll kind of go back at some point and review that again. But I had aesthetics in there too. And one of the nice things about our major projects is they all include public art. And that's another functionality that's gone if you had all of a sudden the project is downsized or eliminated too much. But yeah, that's a good point as well. Okay, Frank, you got any additional suggestions? Frank Thompson? Oh. Frank, did you have any additional comments?
Yeah, you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Good. I screwed up on the mute button.
No problem.
Sorry. That, you know, some of this stuff, First Avenue is a good example, and especially some of the things I've recently heard about First Avenue and why we shouldn't have traffic there, why we shouldn't have capacity there. And I think it's about aesthetics, but I also think it's about recognizing what land use plans there are in place that are going to govern what's happening in some of those corridors. Mm-hmm. And are you going to, in your wildest dreams, meet the requirements? I mean, it's, you know, we're always faced with this, the notion of the guys going into the airport and then now making their decision about cities based upon what it looks like going from the airport. That's a real factor, and it's a real factor in most cities in the country. And I think that part is something that we should be dropping very, very cautiously. You know, we want to create an image for the city. You know, we don't want this to be a city that says if you're there, or you're not there, and nobody knows, and it doesn't have any character. You know, moving to Arizona and to Tucson from spending early lifetime in New York, you know, Tucson always had a character, and it was pretty good. And it was different than a lot of other cities, and, you know, reinforcing that. And I know that we're reinforcing it with some of this with the roadway art, but it's also with the land use planning that we're doing that's going to affect what's next to it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of the things I keep seeing, not so much in the transportation literature, but certainly in the planning literature, is a national movement to looking at land use and looking at affordable housing. And how are we providing housing? And how are we providing a mix of affordable housing? Not predetermined because of income, but predetermined because we have opportunity and we're creating those kind of opportunities. I think we miss some of the things that are going on around us now if we don't recognize that there are going to be these changes. And it's not going to be from changes in necessarily in large 1,000-acre projects or 2,000-acre projects or 5,000 lot subdivisions, but they're going to be more subtle. And we're going to increase density in different places over the years. And we're going to be doing that simply because increasing some of that density allows us to do some of the affordable housing and allows people the opportunities to live wherever they want to live rather than being forced into geographic areas that will preclude anything else. So it seems to me that there's a balancing act with some of this stuff. And we at least need to be cognizant of the balancing act. And given that we have a number of elections that are part and parcel of all this, and whether it's a city election, whether it's a county election, all the messages that come across, for instance, from a city election get transferred on the voters who are going to be voting in the county election or the widespread area elections. And we probably need to be cognizant of those kind of things as we go on. So,
yeah, that's a good. I think when we meet with the jurisdictions, Frank, we can ask them some of those land use related questions. If there's some infill projects that they've been talking to developers in certain corridors, we can put a little pressure on to say, how does the change that you're recommended to this roadway affect the development proposals and the height, the increasing densities and so on along these corridors. So that's a good thought.
I think, Kurt, in addition to the traffic volume information that we're saying, we definitely have to have in our criteria, we ought to have something about land use. Because I will tell you, yesterday I happened to sit through a workshop for the Sunshine Mile that was put out by the city.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, they have some really ambitious land use plans along that corridor, let me tell you. So,
Right.
I mean, we're talking 12-story buildings and things like that that are allowed. So, big changes.
Yeah, that's the Rio Nuevo.
I know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So land use of some consideration, land use conditions or plans would be helpful, I think, in all of this.
Right. That's good. So, well, if there's nothing else on the criteria, with the few suggestions that we have, Jim, I'd suggest that we just go ahead and adopt them. If somebody wants to make a motion to that, I would nominate Bob Iannarino to make a motion.
Thank you, Kurt.
You're welcome.
I'll make the motions based on the recommendations and suggestions presented today to go ahead and adopt the criteria that Jim presented, Jim and Rick, and move forward with establishing the structure for the task force.
I'd second that.
All right.
I think I can still second as a co-chair, right?
Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely. And you can vote as well. Any other discussion?
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I may, just so that I'm clear on what I'm doing, I want to make sure I get all of the notes that were were discussed.
Right.
In terms of on project elimination, one of the things that on 1B, roadway drainage and infrastructure, we also add floodplain impacts.
Yes.
That throughout all of them, we add references to land use considerations. That on scope reduction and revision, and well, actually everything, all of the considerations or all of the reduction, expansion, and eliminations should include the language that we had in safety considerations that were there, and that we develop a process or identify a process that has a draft being prepared provided to the lead agency that has made the request for their review of the draft and submittal of comments, which would be then considered in a potential revision process. And once the committee agrees to the recommendation, there is also the opportunity for a dissension from the local agency as well to be published along with the recommendation. Did I capture everything?
Yeah, you got everything I got.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that
All
sounds
right.
good.
All right.
Yeah, how do you want to move forward with the criteria? Obviously, you can have them finalized for us to work with, but is there a need for the TMC to see the criteria as well or not?
Well, the TMC won't be meeting again until March. So you'll, I think, they will certainly get this information as a part of their packet that's developed for TMC. And any subsequent work that you want to have either provided to them or if nothing else, a summary of what's transpired will be available to the TMC.
Sure. Okay, that sounds good. So anybody not support these criteria? All in favor? I guess everybody is. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Aye.
Let's call it unanimous. Sounds good. So I think there's a couple of things, Jim, that we need to do going forward. Obviously, is to agree on the meeting every 2 weeks. I think that's reasonable. It gives us time to do some of our own homework. In the meantime, go site visits and plan review and whatever we can do as individuals. But if you could establish a central repository someplace of all this information that you're putting together for us, that would be real helpful. It's almost kind of like setting up a project file that we would look at, I guess, on it. So you've got the IT people there that can sort that out. I would prefer to go out and look at it rather than having everything sent to me and then I got to organize it. We all have to organize it on our computers and so on. So does that make sense to everybody else in the task force to have the RTA set up to a central information repository for us?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fine.
And Mr. Chair, what I'll do is I'll make sure that it is on this particular web page, so that the public can see it and you can access it. Probably the simplest thing to do would be to provide links to our to the source documents through the website.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that would work too. Yeah.
And since you alluded to this early on, I think we would want to set a target completion date of perhaps no later than June or something like that. Just to be clear, rather than talk about spring, summer, let's just try and put a date on it,
Yeah. Well, let's say if we're going to meet the first and third Thursdays, then we go for the third Thursday in June as being our final deadline.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I know I had a conversation with Mr. Anarino about some ongoing commitments that he has. I'd like to suggest that we look at a day other than Thursday.
Oh, okay.
I have checked. It looks like, at least from our standpoint, if we looked at doing these meetings, we can host them online. We have I checked with our folks on that. Crystal has assisted me in making sure that we don't have conflicts. Monday afternoons are available. Wednesday afternoons are available, and we could do we only have one conflict every month on Friday morning, but the rest of Fridays are available. So if you wanted to pick a biweekly at a particular time, we could set it up on an ongoing basis so that we don't have conflicts and we've got staff support for everything.
Well, the only thing on my calendar every day is to go to bed at 9:30. So I'm pretty open. Don't worry. Whatever works for the rest of you will work for me.
I would opt for Wednesday if we could, Wednesday afternoon would be fine.
Okay.
That works well. Thanks, John.
Good.
So
You bet, Bob.
Okay. Frank, does that work for you?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Super.
That sounds good. So-
we'll shoot for Wednesdays, and actually I didn't check with my boss yet, make sure it's okay with him, but would say this would be the first week of the month. Do we want to do first and third Wednesdays?
Works for me.
Works.
Okay. All right. And what I'll try to do is I'll have materials. We'll work to get materials out a week in advance, and over the week immediately following the meeting, I'll work with the co-chairs to develop an agenda and make sure we get the source documents put together. What I would suggest is that with this updated or the scope change request review criteria, that I run it by the two co-chairs once I've amended it and bring it back to you for confirmation next meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Jim, I think it would be helpful to reach out to both the city of Tucson and Pima County to find out when they would be available to talk about their projects as well. Because it'd be nice if we could sit down and it doesn't have to be during the timeline of our meetings themselves. I mean, whatever works for the city and us together, and to have discussions about their projects. So, we could get that, sometime in February. We could have those initial meetings, those agencies.
I think that's a great idea. I'll reach out to both the county and to the city, and I'll also extend the invitation out to Miranda, because they'll have an interest in the Silver Bell project.
Good.
Right.
Good.
Jim, and you said that you already have information from ADOT on their schedule for the GAP project. Is that? Or
I can get a more specific schedule. My understanding is that they're working on trying to get that out to bid late this year.
Okay. Because I think what's critical is to have them be somewhat definitive about when the Sunset Interchange is going to be not available. When it's closed down for reconstruction, because that's going to be I think almost a 2-year period. That's going to be closed as they work to extend it over. So that's going to affect, I think, our discussion on Silver.
I think throughout your process, we'll coordinate with ADOT and get a more firm schedule. But as Jim said, most likely they're looking at putting that out to bid by the May-June timeframe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they get it out to bid. They'll get a schedule from the contractors and stuff. So that'll be helpful. Yeah. Okay.
We'll get that information to you.
Sounds good. So there's only item number 4 didn't print out on your agenda, Jim.
The adjournment part?
No.
Oh, that's 3.
Any other additional discussion? I just wanted to bring up under that agenda item that our task force, we will communicate exclusively with the jurisdictions and with the RTA staff. If there's any inquiries from other entities about what we're doing, we will defer those to the RTA, if that's okay with the task force.
As long as you're not adding call to the audience.
Yeah, no. That's something that might be required by the RTA. But so there's always the potential for political controversy in project reviews like this. And since our role is primarily technical, I don't want us to be involved in that in any way. So if there, any media requests, if NBC News calls us, we'll refer them to Jim or Farhad, and they can take care of it.
That works for us. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sounds good. Now on to item 3, adjournments.
So move.
Okay, I'll second.
Second.
All right.
Aye.
Thank you, gents.
All right.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank
Be good,
okay.